My uncle promised to take care of me after my parents died. Instead, he took my money, locked me in the basement, and told everyone I ran away. 10 years later, I showed up at his retirement ceremony with the person he feared most standing next to me. I never thought the sound of a bolt sliding into place could change everything. But when I heard it that day, metal scraping against metal, final and absolute, I knew my childhood was over. "Please, Uncle Darren, I'll be quiet, I swear." The words barely made it past my lips before the basement door slammed shut, sealing me inside that concrete tomb. I was 14 years old, and the man who promised my dying mother he would protect me had just locked me away like a secret he needed to bury. My parents had been gone for 3 months, killed in a highway accident that still felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from, and now the only family I had left was treating me like I didn't exist. I had always been too trusting, my mother used to say, seeing the best in people even when they showed me their worst. That naivety, that desperate need to believe that adults would do the right thing, had made me easy prey. I was also stubborn to a fault, refusing to see warning signs even when they flashed right in front of me. Those first weeks living with Uncle Darren, I ignored the way he looked at the insurance documents, the way his eyes lingered on the bank statements, the way he smiled when the lawyer mentioned my parents' savings account. I wanted so badly to have a family again that I overlooked every red flag. Hours passed in that basement before I heard footsteps on the stairs again. Uncle Darren came down holding a manila folder, and that smile, God, that smile made my stomach turn. "You're lucky," he said, like he was doing me some kind of favor. "Everyone thinks you ran away, saves us both a lot of trouble." My hands shook as he slid papers across the old card table he'd set up down there. Bank documents, insurance payouts, guardianship forms. Everything my parents had worked their entire lives to build, everything they'd left behind to make sure I'd be okay, it was all being transferred to him. "What are you doing?" I whispered. He didn't even look at me. "Taking care of business. Your parents left quite a bit of money, Lena. Someone needs to manage it responsibly. But it's mine. They left it for me." He finally met my eyes, and what I saw there made me feel cold all over. "You're a child. You don't need it. I'm your guardian now, and I'm making the decisions. I want to leave. I want to go upstairs." "No," just like that. No explanation, no justification, just no. "You can't keep me down here. People will ask questions." That's when he laughed, and the sound echoed off the concrete walls. "No one's asking questions, sweetheart. They all think you ran away. Troubled teen, couldn't handle losing her parents, took off in the middle of the night. It's a sad story, really. I've already filed a missing person report, even cried a little when I talked to the police." The reality of what he was saying hit me like a physical blow. "You told people I'm missing. I told them the truth, you're gone. They just don't know where." He stood up, gathering his papers. "This is your home now. Get comfortable." The first 3 months in that basement were the worst. I screamed until my throat bled. I pounded on the door until my hands bruised. I cried until I had no tears left. Uncle Darren came down twice a day, morning and night, with food and water, always reminding me that no one was looking for me anymore, that I had been forgotten, that this was my life now. The basement wasn't completely dark. There was a small window near the ceiling that let in gray light during the day, and Uncle Darren had set up a bare-bones living space with a cot, a bucket, and that card table. But it was a cage nonetheless, and I was trapped. My stubbornness, the same trait that had blinded me to his intentions, now became my survival mechanism. I refused to give up. I refused to accept this as my fate. Instead, I started to observe, to listen, to learn. The heating vents carried sound from the floors above, and I discovered that if I stood on the table beneath one particular vent, I could hear conversations in Uncle Darren's office. That's how I learned about Detective Clara Voss. "Darren, I want to see the house, including the basement." The woman's voice was firm, professional, with an edge that suggested she wasn't someone who took no for an answer. I pressed my ear closer to the vent, hardly breathing. "There's nothing down there," Uncle Darren replied, but I could hear the tightness in his voice, the barely controlled panic. "Just storage." I'd still like to see it. Standard procedure in missing person cases. "Detective Voss, I've cooperated fully with your investigation. My niece ran away. Teenagers do that sometimes, especially after trauma. I don't see how searching my basement is going to help find her." There was a long pause. "Mr. Holt, I've been doing this job for 23 years. I've seen dozens of runaway cases, and something about this one doesn't sit right with me." "What are you implying?" I'm not implying anything. I'm just being thorough. I wanted to scream, to bang on the ceiling, to make any noise that would alert her to my presence. But something stopped me. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was the memory of Uncle Darren's threats about what would happen if I ever tried to escape. Maybe it was just the learned helplessness that had set in after months of captivity. Whatever it was, I stayed silent, and I heard Uncle Darren escort Detective Voss out of the house without ever opening the basement door. But I had heard her name, Detective Clara Voss, the one person Uncle Darren feared, and the one person who refused to close my case. Over the next 2 years, I became a ghost in my own life, existing in that basement while the world moved on above me. But I wasn't idle. Through the vents, I learned everything about Uncle Darren's carefully constructed lies. He donated to children's charities in my parents' memory. He volunteered at school boards, speaking passionately about youth mental health and the tragedy of teen runaways. He built an image of the grieving, patient guardian who had been abandoned by his troubled niece. Every word was a knife in my heart, but I memorized it all. I listened to his phone calls, his meetings, his conversations with friends. I learned about his financial dealings, how he was slowly draining my inheritance through estate management fees and guardianship expenses. I even heard him talking to women he was dating, playing the sympathetic father figure who'd been left to pick up the pieces. My temper, always quick even as a child, would flare hot and bright during those listening sessions. I would pace that small basement like a caged animal, fantasizing about all the ways I could make him pay. But I had nowhere to channel that anger, no outlet except the concrete walls that held me prisoner. So it simmered, building pressure like a volcano waiting to erupt. The opportunity came on a night of heavy rain, the kind of storm that makes the whole world sound like it's being torn apart. I had been working on the window latch for weeks, using a piece of broken metal I'd found to gradually loosen the rust. The sound of thunder and driving rain masked the screech of old metal finally giving way. The window was small, barely large enough for me to squeeze through, and it led to a window well that opened at ground level. At 16 years old, after 2 years in captivity, I was thin enough to make it work. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the few things I had hidden away, documents I'd stolen from Uncle Darren during his visits, a small notebook where I'd recorded everything I'd overheard, and I climbed through that window into the storm. The rain soaked me immediately, cold and shocking, but it felt like freedom. I ran through the darkness, barefoot and shaking, until I found a gas station 3 miles away. The clerk took one look at me wild-eyed, filthy, clearly in distress, and called the police. But when the officers arrived, I didn't tell them my story. Instead, I gave them one name. "I need to speak to Detective Clara Voss. Only her, please." They brought her to the station at 2 in the morning. I was wrapped in a blanket, holding a cup of hot chocolate that I couldn't drink because my hands were shaking too badly. Detective Voss walked into that interview room, and I saw her eyes widen in recognition. She was tall, maybe 5'9", with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, and eyes that looked like they'd seen too much suffering. Lines creased her face around her mouth and eyes, the kind that come from years of carrying other people's pain. "Lena Alvarez," she said quietly, "everyone thinks you're dead." "Everyone thinks I ran away," I corrected. "My uncle told me you were the one who didn't believe that story." She sat down across from me, studying my face like she was seeing a ghost. "You've been missing for 2 years." "I haven't been missing. I've been in his basement." I watched her process that information, saw the way her jaw tightened and her hands curled into fists on the table. "Tell me everything," she said, so I did. I told her about the locked door, about the documents I'd seen him sign, about the inheritance he'd stolen, about every conversation I'd overheard through the vents. I showed her the papers I'd managed to steal, bank statements showing transfers, legal documents with forged signatures, emails between Uncle Darren and his accountant discussing how to liquidate my parents' assets. "Why didn't you come forward sooner?" one of the other officers asked. Detective Voss shot him a look that could have melted steel. "She was a child being held captive. Don't ask stupid questions." But bringing evidence wasn't enough. Over the next few weeks, as I stayed in protective custody, Detective Voss explained the harsh reality. "Your uncle is careful, Lena, very careful. He's respected in the community, he's got alibis for everything, and a good lawyer could argue that you did run away and only came back now to make accusations." "But I have proof." My temper flared, hot and immediate. I have the documents, I have my testimony, which a defense attorney would tear apart. You were a traumatized teenager. You could have misunderstood things, misremembered things. The documents could have been legitimate estate management. Without harder evidence, without something undeniable, this case could fall apart in court. I wanted to scream. After everything I'd been through, the idea that he might walk free made me want to tear the world apart. But Detective Voss placed a hand on my shoulder. I'm not saying we give up. I'm saying we do this right. We build a case so airtight that he can't slip through. Can you be patient? Patience had never been my strong suit, but I was learning. How long? As long as it takes. That's when she told me about her daughter. We were sitting in her car outside a safe house where I was staying, and she looked out the window at nothing. I had a daughter, Julia. She was 14 when she disappeared, 10 years ago. My breath caught. The same year Yes. Her voice was steady, but I could hear the pain underneath. I never found her. I never stopped looking, but I never found her. When your case came across my desk, when your uncle reported you missing, something about it felt wrong. The way he talked about you, the way he seemed almost relieved. I couldn't let it go. I'm sorry, I whispered. Don't be. Finding you, bringing him to justice, it won't bring Julia back. But maybe it means her disappearance wasn't for nothing. Maybe it means I learned enough to save someone else. That conversation changed everything. This wasn't just about my revenge anymore. It was about making sure that Uncle Darren never had the chance to hurt anyone else, about proving that Detective Voss's instincts had been right all along, about justice for a woman who had lost her own daughter, but refused to lose another girl. So I waited, and while I waited, I learned. Detective Voss helped me get into community college, where I studied criminal justice and accounting. I learned how to trace financial fraud, how to build investigative cases, how the legal system worked, and where its weaknesses lay. I spent hours in the library reading about similar cases, about guardians who had exploited their wards, about the specific laws surrounding estate management and financial abuse. Every year that passed, Uncle Darren's reputation grew. He became a senior administrator at the largest school district in the county. He gave speeches at education conferences about supporting students through trauma. He was profiled in the local newspaper as a community leader. And every year, Detective Voss and I added another piece to our case. We tracked every dollar he'd taken from my inheritance. We found the accountant who had helped him hide the transfers and convinced him to testify in exchange for immunity. We built timelines, gathered witnesses, documented every lie he'd told. My impulsiveness, the trait that had almost made me bang on the ceiling that first day, had been tempered by years of forced patience. But my anger hadn't diminished. It had crystallized into something cold and focused. I wanted him to pay, not just legally, but publicly. I wanted everyone who had praised him and believed his lies to see exactly what kind of monster he was. When Detective Voss told me that Uncle Darren was planning a retirement ceremony, a grand celebration of his 30 years in education, complete with awards and speeches and a ballroom full of colleagues, I knew that was our moment. "We have enough to arrest him now," she said. "We don't need to wait." "Yes, we do," I replied. My voice was calm, but inside I was burning. "I want witnesses. I want everyone who ever believed in him to see his face when he realizes it's over. I want him to feel what I felt, trapped, exposed, with nowhere to run." Detective Voss studied me for a long moment. "That's not about justice, Lena. That's about revenge. Can it be both?" She didn't answer, but she didn't stop me either. The months leading up to the ceremony were torture. My stubbornness, my inability to let things go, made every day feel like an eternity. I had nightmares about something going wrong, about him somehow escaping justice at the last moment. I became obsessed with every detail, checking and rechecking our evidence, rehearsing what I would say, imagining every possible outcome. Detective Voss noticed. "You're going to make yourself sick," she said one afternoon when she found me surrounded by case files for the third day in a row. "I need to be ready. What if his lawyer finds a loophole? What if someone doesn't show up to testify? What if—" "Lena," she cut me off gently but firmly. "We've done everything right. The evidence is solid. The warrants are ready. You need to trust the process." But trust had never come easily to me, especially not after what I'd been through. "I can't let him get away with this." "He won't, but you need to take care of yourself too. When was the last time you ate something? Slept more than 4 hours?" I didn't have an answer. The truth was, I had been running on pure adrenaline and rage for weeks. My hands trembled constantly. I'd lost weight I couldn't afford to lose, and I kept snapping at people who were only trying to help. My flaws, impatience, obsessiveness, that burning need for vindication were consuming me. "I'm scared," I finally admitted. "What if I mess this up? What if I say the wrong thing or lose my temper or—" "Then you're human," Detective Voss said simply. "Lena, you've spent years building this case. You've been patient when anyone else would have given up. You've been strong when you had every right to fall apart. If you stumble at the finish line, it doesn't erase everything you've accomplished." But I didn't want to stumble. I wanted perfection. I wanted Uncle Darren to suffer exactly as I had planned, with no deviation, no mercy, no escape. The night before the ceremony, I couldn't sleep. I stood in front of the mirror in my apartment, practicing what I would say. "Hello, Uncle. You told everyone I ran away, but I didn't. I was exactly where you left me." The words felt hollow, rehearsed. I tried again with more emotion. "You locked me in a basement and stole my life." Too angry, too raw again. "I spent 2 years in the dark while you played the victim." Better, but still not right. I must have repeated those lines 100 times, tweaking the tone, adjusting the emphasis, trying to find the perfect balance between controlled and devastating. My phone buzzed with a text from Detective Voss. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow is going to be a long day." I typed back, "I can't sleep. What if I freeze up? What if I can't do this?" Her response came quickly. "You've survived 2 years in a basement and built a legal case strong enough to put him away for decades. You can handle one retirement ceremony. Trust yourself." But trusting myself had always been the problem. I second-guessed everything, replayed conversations looking for mistakes, obsessed over things I couldn't change. It was exhausting, this constant internal battle between the fierce determination that had kept me alive and the crippling self-doubt that whispered I wasn't good enough, strong enough, perfect enough to see this through. The ballroom was packed when we arrived. I stood outside the double doors with Detective Voss, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might break through my ribs. Through the small windows in the doors, I could see Uncle Darren at the podium, basking in applause. He looked older than I remembered. His hair had gone gray at the temples, his face had developed more lines, but that smile was the same. Self-satisfied, arrogant, completely unaware that his entire world was about to collapse. "Are you ready?" Detective Voss asked. "No," I thought, "I'm terrified. My hands won't stop shaking. My mind is screaming at me to run, to hide, to avoid confrontation like I always have." But I said, "Yes." We pushed open the doors. At first, nobody noticed. The superintendent was at the podium, talking about Uncle Darren's unwavering commitment to students and his tireless advocacy for youth welfare. People in formal attire filled round tables, sipping wine and nodding along. The local councilman who had organized the event sat at the head table, beaming. Then someone near the back turned and saw me. Then another. A ripple of confusion spread through the room as people registered the presence of a young woman and a police detective entering during the ceremony. Uncle Darren must have felt the shift in energy because he looked up from his plaque, following the gazes of his guests. When his eyes landed on me, I watched the blood drain from his face. It was the most satisfying thing I'd ever seen. "You!" he breathed into the microphone, the word echoing through the suddenly quiet ballroom. I walked slowly down the center aisle, Detective Voss beside me. Every step felt like I was crossing an ocean. People whispered to each other, confused, curious. Uncle Darren gripped the podium like it was the only thing keeping him upright. When I was about 10 feet from the stage, I stopped, looked up at him, and spoke loud enough for everyone to hear. "Hello, Uncle Darren." The silence in that room was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop. Uncle Darren's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He looked like he was seeing a ghost. "You told everyone I ran away," I continued, my voice steady even though inside I was shaking. "But I didn't. I was exactly where you left me." "Lena," he finally managed, forcing a weak smile. This is wonderful. Everyone, this is my niece. We've been trying to reconnect." "Don't," I cut him off. "Don't you dare pretend this is some kind of reunion." The councilman stood up from the head table. "I'm sorry, but who is this? What's going on?" Detective Voss stepped forward, her badge already in hand. "My name is Detective Clara Voss. This is Lena Alvarez, a young woman who was reported missing 10 years ago by the man you're here to honor tonight." Gasps and murmurs filled the room. Uncle Darren held up his hands in a placating gesture. "This is a misunderstanding." "Lena, sweetheart, I know we've had our differences, but this isn't the time or place. You locked me in your basement." The words came out like bullets. For 2 years, you told everyone I ran away. You took my parents' money. You made me disappear so you could steal everything they left behind. His face went from pale to red. That's absurd. She's clearly disturbed. The trauma of losing her parents is nothing compared to the trauma of being imprisoned by the only family I had left. My voice cracked, and I hated myself for it. I had wanted to stay calm, controlled, devastating in my composure, but the anger was too big, too raw. You came down to that basement twice a day with food like I was some kind of animal. You told me nobody was looking for me. You made me believe I had been forgotten. I did no such thing. He was shouting now, defensive. You ran away. I filed reports. I cooperated with the police. You lied to the police. Detective Voss interrupted. And we can prove it. She pulled out a folder, the same type of folder I'd seen Uncle Darren carry down to the basement all those years ago, and I wondered if she'd chosen it deliberately. We have bank records showing systematic theft from Lena's inheritance. We have testimony from your accountant about how you hid the transfers. We have physical evidence from the basement where she was held. And we have this. She pulled out a small recording device, and my stomach dropped. I hadn't known about this. What is that? I whispered. Detective Voss looked at me apologetically. I went back to the house last month with a warrant. The new owners let me search the basement. I found this hidden in the ventilation system. She pressed play. My own voice filled the ballroom, tinny and distant but unmistakable. It was from years ago, one of the recordings I'd made using a broken radio I'd found. Day 487 in the basement. Uncle Darren came down today and told me the missing person case has been closed. He said I'm legally dead now. He seemed happy about it. The recording continued, my teenage voice cataloging days and events, and I felt tears streaming down my face because I hadn't known those recordings still existed. I thought they'd been lost or destroyed, but Detective Voss had found them. She had found the proof I didn't even know we had. Uncle Darren's face had gone purple. You can't prove any of this. That recording could be faked. The documents could be forged. We have your accountant's testimony, Detective Voss said calmly. He's already agreed to testify in exchange for immunity. We have the new homeowners who found restraints attached to the wall in the basement. We have medical records from Lena's examination showing evidence consistent with long-term captivity. And we have surveillance footage from the night she escaped, showing her emerging from your property's window well at 2:47 a.m. during a rainstorm. The room had erupted into chaos. People were standing, talking over each other, pulling out phones. The councilman looked like he wanted to disappear. Uncle Darren tried to step away from the podium, but 2 uniformed officers had appeared at the side doors. Detective Voss had planned this perfectly. Darren Holt, she said clearly, officially, you're under arrest for unlawful imprisonment, financial exploitation of a minor, fraud, and filing false police reports. Wait, he held up his hands as the officers approached. Wait, this is ridiculous. You can't just believe everything she says. She was a troubled kid. Her parents had just died. She was acting out. I was 14, I shouted, and I didn't care anymore about staying calm or controlled. All those years of suppressed rage came pouring out. I was a child who had just lost everything, and you locked me in a basement and stole from me. You told people I ran away. You gave speeches about supporting youth mental health. You pretended to be some kind of hero while I was suffering underground in your house. You're being dramatic, he sneered, and for a moment the mask slipped completely. The kind, concerned uncle was gone, replaced by the cold, calculating man I'd lived in fear of for 2 years. You were fine. You were fed. You were sheltered. I was a prisoner. My hands were shaking, my whole body trembling with fury. Do you have any idea what it's like to be 15 years old and genuinely believe that nobody in the world cares if you're alive or dead? To listen through vents while your captor gives speeches about helping children? To watch years of your life disappear while he spends money your dead parents left for you? They left it for your care. They left it for me. I was screaming now, and some rational part of my brain knew I should stop, should let Detective Voss handle this professionally, but I couldn't. You took everything from me. My freedom, my inheritance, my childhood, my trust in people, everything. And you stood up here tonight accepting awards for being a pillar of the community. He laughed, actually laughed. You think anyone will believe you? Look at yourself. You're hysterical, you're clearly unstable. Detective Voss stepped between us. Mr. Holt, you have the right to remain silent. I suggest you use it. The officers moved to handcuff him, and he tried to pull away. Get your hands off me. Do you know who I am? I've served this community for 30 years. I'm being honored here tonight. You're being arrested, Detective Voss corrected. And I'd advise you to come quietly. But he didn't. He fought as they cuffed him, shouting about lawyers and lawsuits and wrongful arrest. He called me a liar, called Detective Voss corrupt, called everyone in the room a witness to police harassment. People backed away from him, their faces showing shock and disgust. The man they'd gathered to honor was revealing himself to be exactly what I'd claimed, a monster in a respectable suit. As they led him toward the door, he passed close to where I stood. He looked at me, and for just a second, I saw something in his eyes that made my blood run cold. Not fear or remorse, hatred, pure, undiluted hatred. "You ungrateful little," he started, but one of the officers cut him off. "That's enough." They hauled him away, still shouting, still denying. Still convinced that his reputation would save him. The ballroom remained in chaos even after he was gone. The councilman was on his phone, probably calling lawyers or PR people. The superintendent looked like she might be sick. Other guests were filing out quickly, clearly wanting no association with the evening's events. I stood there in the center of it all, trembling and crying and feeling like I might collapse. Detective Voss put a hand on my shoulder. "You did it," she said quietly. But I didn't feel victorious. I felt exhausted and angry and somehow still afraid. "I lost it," I said. "I was supposed to stay calm, and I screamed at him like someone who had been through hell and finally got to confront the person who put her there," Detective Voss finished. "Lena, you were never going to be perfect in this moment. Nobody could be." The aftermath unfolded over the next several weeks like a slow-motion car crash. Uncle Darren was denied bail. The judge deemed him a flight risk given the severity of the charges and his demonstrated willingness to manipulate legal systems. His lawyer held a press conference claiming his client was the victim of a disturbed young woman's fabrications, but the evidence was too overwhelming. The accountant testified about the fraudulent estate management, confirming that Uncle Darren had been systematically draining my inheritance for years. The new owners of Uncle Darren's house testified about the modifications they'd found in the basement. The heavy bolt on the door, the reinforced locks, the chain anchors in the concrete wall. Medical experts testified about the evidence of prolonged captivity in my physical examination. Child psychologists testified about the lasting trauma of such imprisonment. But the most damaging testimony came from someone I hadn't expected. A woman named Patricia Reeves came forward claiming she had briefly dated Uncle Darren about 6 months into my captivity. She testified that she'd heard strange sounds from the basement during a visit, and when she asked about it, Uncle Darren had become aggressive and asked her to leave. She'd found it odd enough to mention to friends, but not odd enough to pursue. Her testimony established a pattern of suspicious behavior and provided corroboration for the timeline. The trial lasted 3 weeks. I attended every day, sitting in the gallery and watching Uncle Darren's defense crumble piece by piece. His lawyers tried everything, questioning my credibility, suggesting I'd run away and only returned years later to make false accusations, implying that the evidence had been planted or misinterpreted. But the jury saw through it. They saw the recordings, heard the testimony, examined the financial documents. On the day of the verdict, the courtroom was packed. I sat between Detective Voss and a victim advocate who had been assigned to my case. My hands wouldn't stop shaking as the jury foreman stood. On the count of unlawful imprisonment, we find the defendant guilty. On the count of financial exploitation of a minor, guilty. On the count of fraud, guilty. On all counts, guilty. Uncle Darren's face remained impassive, but I saw his hands grip the table hard enough that his knuckles turned white. The judge thanked the jury and set a sentencing date for 3 weeks later. As the bailiffs led Uncle Darren away, he turned and looked directly at me one last time. I had imagined this moment for years, the final look we'd share before he went to prison. I thought I'd feel triumphant, vindicated, free. Instead, I just felt sad. Sad for the 14-year-old girl who had lost everything. Sad for the years I'd never get back. Sad for what I'd become in pursuit of justice, obsessive, angry, unable to let go even when it was destroying me. At sentencing, the judge gave Uncle Darren 25 years in prison with no possibility of parole for 15. He would be 71 years old before he could even apply for release. The courtroom erupted in whispers when the sentence was read. It was harsh, harsher than many violent criminals received. But the judge had been thorough in his explanation. "Mr. Holt," he said, looking down at the man who had been such a pillar of the community, "you were given the most sacred trust, the care of a vulnerable child. Instead of protecting her, you exploited her. You imprisoned her. You stole from her. And perhaps most egregiously, you used your position of respect in the community to deflect suspicion and build a false narrative. The harm you caused is incalculable. The sentence reflects both the severity of your crimes and the need to protect society from individuals who would abuse positions of trust in such a calculated manner." Uncle Darren was led away without any final words. No apology, no explanation, nothing. And I realized I'd never get closure in the form of an admission or an apology. He would go to his grave insisting he'd done nothing wrong. After the sentencing, Detective Voss took me to a quiet coffee shop several blocks from the courthouse. We sat in a corner booth, both of us nursing drinks we weren't really drinking. "How do you feel?" she asked. I thought about it for a long time. "Empty," I finally said. "I thought I'd feel different when it was over. Lighter maybe, free, but I just feel empty." She nodded like she understood. "Revenge is like that sometimes. You spend so long focused on making someone pay that you don't think about what comes after. What happens when there's no one left to fight?" "I don't know how to not be angry anymore," I admitted. "I don't know how to just be normal. Go to work, hang out with friends, think about the future. For so long, everything has been about this, about making him pay. And now he is paying, and I don't know what I'm supposed to do with myself." "Figure out who you are when you're not defined by what was done to you," Detective Voss said softly. "That's the hardest part. That's what I've been trying to do for 10 years since Julia disappeared." "Have you figured it out?" She smiled sadly. "Some days yes, some days no. But helping you, seeing this case through, it helped. It made me feel like maybe there was a reason I kept going after Julia was gone. Maybe I learned enough from losing her to save you." The months after the sentencing were strange. I graduated with my degree in criminal justice, but the idea of working in law enforcement made me feel sick. I'd seen too much of how the system could fail, how people could slip through cracks, how justice was often just a word people used to feel better about tragedies they couldn't prevent. Instead, I started working for a nonprofit that helped youth aging out of foster care navigate financial systems. It wasn't glamorous or high-paying, but it felt meaningful. I was using what I'd learned about estate management and legal rights to help kids who, like me, had been left vulnerable by circumstance. Detective Voss retired from the police force and started volunteering with organizations searching for missing children. We had lunch together once a month, neither of us talking much about the case anymore, just trying to figure out how to live with what we'd been through. But the real twist came on a random Tuesday afternoon, almost a year after Uncle Darren's sentencing. I was at my apartment sorting through mail when I found an envelope with no return address. Inside was a newspaper clipping and a handwritten note. The clipping was about Uncle Darren. Apparently, he'd been attacked in prison by another inmate. He'd survived, but barely, and was now in the medical ward with serious injuries. The note was short, written in handwriting I didn't recognize. "Thought you'd want to know. Prisons don't like people who hurt kids." A friend, I stared at that note for a long time, feeling sick. Part of me, the angry, vengeful part that had driven me for so many years, felt satisfied. He was suffering. He was paying in ways the legal system couldn't make him pay. But another part of me felt horrified. This wasn't justice. This was violence begetting violence, pain creating more pain. I called Detective Voss. "Did you send this?" I asked when she answered. "And what?" I explained about the clipping and the note. There was a long silence on the other end. "No," she finally said, "that wasn't me." "Do you think I should feel bad about him getting hurt?" Another pause. "I think you should feel however you feel. There's no right answer here, Lena." But there had to be, didn't there? There had to be some way to process this that made sense, some emotion that was appropriate. Instead, I just felt numb. I put the clipping in a drawer and tried not to think about it. Therapy became a regular part of my life, something my victim advocate had strongly recommended. My therapist, Dr. Sarah Chen, a patient woman in her 50s who seemed unshakable, helped me work through the complicated mess of emotions I carried. "You're allowed to feel relief that he's suffering," she said during one session. "That doesn't make you a bad person, it makes you human." "But I don't want to be the kind of person who's happy about violence," I argued, "even if it's happening to someone who hurt me." "Then don't be. But don't deny the part of you that feels satisfied either. Acknowledge it. Understand where it comes from. Then decide who you want to be going forward. That became my work, acknowledging all the contradictory feelings I had, all the ways the experience had changed me, and trying to figure out who I wanted to become. I was 24 years old, and in many ways, I felt like I was starting my life for the first time. The anniversary of my parents' deaths came and went. For the first time in years, I visited their graves without feeling consumed by rage or grief. I brought flowers and sat on the grass between their headstones, just talking to them like they could hear me. "I got him," I said quietly. "He's in prison. He won't hurt anyone else. I thought that would make me feel better, but mostly I just miss you guys. I wish you were here. I wish I'd gotten to grow up normal, with family dinners and stupid arguments about curfews and all the regular stuff. I wish I didn't have to become someone so focused on revenge that I forgot how to just live." The wind rustled through the trees, and I imagined it was them, listening, understanding. "I'm going to try, though, to live, to be more than what he made me. Detective Voss says that's the hardest part, and I believe her, but I'm going to try." I left feeling lighter than I had in years. Not healed, I wasn't sure I'd ever be fully healed, but maybe on the path to something that looked like peace. The unexpected twist came on an ordinary evening 6 months later. I was home making dinner when my phone rang with an unfamiliar number. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Lena Alvarez?" a woman's voice asked. "Yes, my name is Julia Voss." The world stopped. The wooden spoon I'd been using clattered to the floor. "What?" "I'm Clara's daughter. I saw the news coverage of your case, and I needed to call. Is there any way we could meet?" My hands shook as I held the phone. "Does Detective Voss know you're alive?" "No," Julia's voice cracked. "I've been too afraid to contact her, but watching your story, seeing how she never gave up on you, I realized I needed to try. I needed to come home." We met the next day at a small park. Julia was 24 now, the same age as me, with her mother's dark eyes and the same determined set to her jaw. She looked tired, haunted, but alive. "I ran away," she said as we sat on a bench together. "My parents were getting divorced. Everything was a mess, and I just ran. I thought I'd come back after a few days, but then I saw the missing person reports, saw my mom on TV begging for information, and I panicked. I thought I'd be in so much trouble, so I kept running. I changed my name, moved around, tried to build a new life. For 10 years, she nodded, tears streaming down her face. I know it sounds crazy, but the longer I stayed away, the harder it became to come back." "How do you explain a decade? How do you face someone you hurt that badly?" "You just do it," I said. "Trust me, facing the hard things is worth it." 3 days later, I went with Julia to the police station where Detective Voss still volunteered. We found her in a small office, reviewing cold case files. She looked up when we entered, and when she saw Julia, she went completely white. "Mom," Julia whispered. What happened next is hard to describe. Detective Voss stood slowly, like she was moving through water, like she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. She crossed the room in 3 steps and pulled Julia into her arms, both of them crying so hard they could barely breathe. I stepped back, giving them space, my own tears falling freely. After everything I'd been through, after all the pain and anger and revenge, this moment of pure reunion felt like the universe balancing itself. They talked for hours. Julia explained everything, the fear, the shame, the years of running. Detective Voss listened, and though I could see the hurt and anger flickering across her face, she never let go of her daughter's hand. When Julia finally finished, Detective Voss just said, "You're home, that's what matters, you're home." She looked at me then, her eyes red and swollen. "Thank you," she said, "for bringing her back." "I didn't do anything," I protested. "You did, your story, your courage, it gave her the strength to come home." That's everything. As I drove home that night, I thought about revenge and justice and the unexpected ways our pain connects us to each other. I'd spent years focused on making Uncle Darren pay for what he'd done, and I'd succeeded. He was in prison, probably for the rest of his life. My parents' money had been recovered and returned to me. The truth was known, but the real healing hadn't come from his punishment. It had come from the connections I'd made along the way, with Detective Voss, who refused to give up on me, with the other survivors I'd met through my nonprofit work, with my therapist, who helped me understand that being angry didn't make me broken, with Julia, whose return showed me that sometimes the stories we think have ended can still have unexpected chapters. Uncle Darren took 2 years of my life. He stole my innocence and my trust and my sense of safety in the world. The revenge I'd planned and executed had given me a sense of justice, but it hadn't given me my life back. That was something I had to build myself, piece by piece, day by day. My flaws, the stubbornness, the impatience, the obsessive need for control, had driven me through the darkest parts of the journey. But they'd also made me who I was, someone who didn't give up, who fought for justice, who refused to be a victim forever. The trick now was learning to channel those traits into something constructive rather than destructive, to build instead of just burning down. On the 1-year anniversary of Uncle Darren's sentencing, I received a letter from him. The prison had forwarded it to my lawyer, who asked if I wanted to read it. I did, though I wasn't sure why. The letter was short, written in his careful, precise handwriting. It wasn't an apology. He still insisted he'd been trying to protect me, that I'd misunderstood his intentions, that the legal system had failed to see the truth. He blamed me for ruining his life. I read it once, then burned it in my kitchen sink and washed the ashes down the drain. Some people never change. Some people never take responsibility for the harm they cause. And that was okay. I didn't need his apology or his admission to move forward with my life. His opinion of me, his version of events, none of it mattered anymore. What mattered was that I was free. Really, truly free. Not just physically, but emotionally. I'd spent so long defining myself by what he'd done to me, by my need for revenge, by my anger and pain. Now, finally, I was ready to define myself by what came next. I enrolled in graduate school to study social work. I started dating again, slowly and carefully, learning to trust people despite everything. I adopted a dog, a scraggly rescue who'd been abused and abandoned, and we healed together. And once a month, I had lunch with Detective Voss and her daughter, 3 women who'd all survived different types of imprisonment, literal, emotional, self-imposed, and found our way back to the light. The revenge had been necessary. I don't regret it. Uncle Darren needed to face justice for what he'd done, and I needed to be the one to make it happen. But the revenge wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning of learning how to live again.